Okay, we are live. Folks, welcome to the show. I don't normally do live streams. I live stream every Thursday with my buddy, co-host Alex Medeiros, Triple X. But typically when I'm doing these solo videos, they are mostly pre-recorded. But I said, you know what? We are going to test the waters and do a live reaction. So today I am going to be reacting. Our good buddy theologian Wesley Huff has done a interview with a Yale professor named Dr. Kidd. I kid you not, Thomas Kidd. And they went over, kind of in the honor in the vein of America 250. They did a Q&A on the founding fathers and their Christianity. Were they Christian or not? They touched on Christian nationalism as well. So we're going to do a live reaction to this video. And I, as your church and state biblical referee, your biblical referee for all things church and state, we're going to live react to this video and see if there's any fouls that need to be called on this man, if he gets it right. I'm still a student of the game, but I have been studying church and state for the better part of, going on 4 years now. I study a lot about this topic, so we'll see if this Yale professor cuts the mustard. Wesley Huff, I find it odd that he's doing a video or did a video on the founding fathers of America, being that he is Canadian. So just goes to show you, maybe he does love this country a little bit. I don't know. We're going to find out. But yeah, this should be interesting. Because I skimmed through the video. I haven't watched it all. We're going to this will be live. This will be my live reaction to it. I think this, when it comes to the Ivy League schools, you gotta be careful with the Ivy League schools, because most of them are just probably not teaching correct history. So I'll be curious to see how this interview with Wesley Huff and this Yale professor goes, and see what they got right, what they got wrong. Maybe I can fill in some gaps here. Like I said, I've been studying church and state for a long time. Better part of 4 years now. Still a student. There's always so much to learn, though. Always so much to learn. So I'm still learning. But I do like Wesley Huff. I think he's an amazing biblical scholar, I guess you want to call him. And I like a lot of his stuff. So I think this interview will be good. Regardless of where this Yale professor falls. I think this is going to be a good interview. So let's jump to it. Share my screen here, and we will live react to this interview. Hit that thumbs up if you are joining us. Drop your questions in the chat too. Like I said, I have been studying this topic for quite a long time, so hopefully I can answer your questions. If you have any, feel free to drop those in the comments, and we will try to answer them as they come in. Don't mind me. I'm just a boomer trying to figure out this technology here. Like I said, I don't normally do live. I do a lot of pre-records. There we go. Okay. Let's jump into this interview and see what this guy's got to say. And let's get right to it.
Hi, friends. I am grateful to be partnering again with...
We're going to skip the intro, I think. Yeah, let's skip the intro. Jump right into the meat and potatoes here, folks.
If we're talking about that particular subject, in what sense, if any, does the United States or can the United States be described as having a Christian founding?
Right. Well, of course, if you were able to do a survey in 1776 among the white people in America, I mean, 99.
What'd I tell you? Right? These Ivy League professors, they can't help but be woke. And he jumps right off with it. Just making sure we know that it's white people. If we surveyed the white people, That's hilarious.
9% would say that they're Christians. Now, how many of those are born again people? Who knows? But vast, overwhelming, at least nominal Christian commitment among the people who were involved in the revolution. Also, the loyalists who opposed the revolution were overwhelmingly Christian. So,
it's interesting that he said that. He says the loyalists were overwhelmingly Christian. However, according to Eric Metaxas's new book, the British actually made fun of the Americans for how Bible thumping that they were. So if the loyalists here in the States were overwhelmingly Christian, I would find that odd that the British would come over here and make fun of all of us for being Bible thumpers. So I don't know how true that statement is, but
they brought to the table all kinds of Christian assumptions about politics and human nature and good government and ideas about equality and justice. So there are Christian influences just all over the place in the American founding. But I think, whether we were founded as a Christian nation is a little more specific kind of question to ask. And there's one really clear way in which we're not, and that is that we didn't have an official national church. And of course, the traditional model there is that the Church of England had and still is the official national church of England, and that gives it legal status and tax support and those kinds of things. And so, when you get to the U.S. Constitution in the 1780s, they decide that at least on the national level, that there will be no official national church. And instead, they decide to emphasize free exercise of religion and religious liberty, which are somewhat in tension, because if you have an official national church, they're going to resort.
Not only did we not have or opt for a national church, and there's a bunch of reasons for that, which hopefully he gets into. If he doesn't, I will get into. But throughout history, Christian nations in general were divine right of kings theocracies, right? They were able to convince people, because they couldn't read the Bible themselves, that God has ordained kings to be rulers over them, and they were chosen by God, which in a way they were, because God is all sovereign. But that was a true bastardization of the Bible, because the Bible does not say specifically that the proper form of government is kings, and all the Old Testament prophets, they don't exist. Like, we don't have those kind of prophets anymore. So unless Ezekiel himself is coming down and ordaining kings, I don't buy that anybody had a divine right to be a king. I think that whole mode of government was just silly, and telling people that was silly. But I mean, if you can't read it for yourself, which is why it's so important that the Bible got translated into Latin and then English, so that we could all read it for ourselves and find out that, like, hey, these guys aren't really telling us what's really going on. So very, very interesting there.
Or the right to kind of call balls and strikes denominationally and theologically and so forth. So that does not mean that the founding was anti-religious at all, but there is a specific way in which it was secular and not legally Christian.
I agree with him that he says legally, I guess, Christian. Because again, we didn't establish a national church. We got rid of this whole divine right of kings ordeal. But secular, I think that's a term that may be a bit too far.
Yeah. I often hear about kind of the theological influences of, say, the Puritans or the, those who came over on the Mayflower. In terms of those origins, how much do you think that actually has a bleed through effect as the decades go on, as the United States of America comes into more of a formulated view?
Well, the New England colonies, in particular, Massachusetts and Connecticut, and the Plymouth colony that the Pilgrims founded, are founded for specifically Christian reasons, and that's about half the colonies of the 13 that revolted against Britain were originally founded for religious reasons.
Fun fact, yes, they were. The Puritans flee to America so that they can practice their Christianity so they can freely practice their Christianity, their specific theology of it, as they wish, their pursuit of happiness, so to speak. But the Puritans themselves were actually very intolerant of other theologies, which I hope he touches on here.
And of course, the Puritans are just enormously theologically astute and sophisticated and articulate. And so
and very Calvinists, from what I understand.
If you look to the Puritan tradition, you can find,
By the way, if you're watching, hit that thumbs up for your boy and drop any questions you might have in the chat. I'll be sure to get to those as they come in.
Just vast resources as far as theological reflection on politics and the purpose of government and good rulers and those sorts of things. When you look specifically at the Mayflower Compact of 1620 with the Pilgrims, this is arguably the sort of, a first kind of very informal American Constitution that reflects a kind of idea that a constitution is a compact among the people, and among other things, they say that we're doing this for the glory of God. So those kinds of ideas are just in the water culturally for the colonists, for the patriots, Thomas Jefferson, just to give one example, says, that in Virginia, when they're trying to get their act together to declare a day of prayer and fasting in the 1770s, that they have to go back and rummage through Puritan proclamations to sort of remember how you do this.
Yeah, it's funny that he brought that up, because that is actually how some people, myself maybe included, would we attribute the first Thanksgiving to the Puritans, because they were in a drought. And they were about to starve to death, right? They're borderline about to starve to death. And you can read about this in a Plymouth Plantation. I do believe that's the name of the book. The diary of the founder of the Plymouth Plantation. His name is slipping me, and it's super famous. I don't know why it's slipping me right now, but anyway, he kept a diary of the Puritans' entire journey. And so the drought's happening. They declare a day of fasting and prayer. They're like, we need rain. This is going to bring the rain. And then it does. It brings rain. It saves their crops, this day of fair and prayer. So then they declared a day of Thanksgiving because of that. And some people, myself included, attribute that as the official first Thanksgiving, so to speak.
So, even someone like Jefferson, who is not a Puritan, let's put it that way, it knows automatically where to look when you're, say, looking for how do you articulate a day of prayer and fasting. So there's influences all over the place.
Hey, just a quick reminder about the giveaway we mentioned earlier in the giving away, and all the winner included. It's an incredible history and trust the Bible, a number of 3rd and 4th century play, which are well worth your time to see. So enter to win. Just head over to mbts.e and fill out the quick back to the episode. And what do you think of interpretations of America's founding as either wholly Christian or wholly secular? Because I often hear in the back and forths, especially in online dialogues.
William Bradford, that just came to me. William Bradford of Plymouth Plantation. Super interesting read. I highly suggest it.
People will make much of the founding of America being a Christian nation, but then there's a fair amount of pushback in regards to that as well, which I think, is evidenced by both sides in various streams. What do you think of that as someone who researches this?
Yeah, especially on social media, we go to extremes about everything, and so the Christian founding question is one example among many, but it's especially pertinent this anniversary year. And so, secularists will say, well, the founding is entirely secular and irreligious and even anti-religious, and all the founding fathers are, deists, if not closet atheists, which is ridiculous. None of them are atheists, but
I'm so glad he said that. He redeemed himself from his earlier shenanigans where he tried to make a racial, make this whole thing a racial thing. So I thought this was going to be a woke interview, but he just redeemed himself with that statement. Yes, not only did they claim that all the founding fathers were deists, they claimed that the ones who weren't deists were straight up atheists, and that is just ridiculous. That is false history. It is absolutely 100% not true. And so I'm glad that a Yale professor of all people said that.
Some of them are deists for sure.
Even the ones they said that were deists, I'm not so sure all of them were. Ben Franklin is often attributed to being a deist. And fun fact about Benjamin Franklin, if you read the very first chapter of his autobiography, he writes and gives thanks to God for the things that have happened in his life. Now, if you're a deist, if you don't know what deism is, deism is that God just winds the clock. He creates everything, lets it go. He does not interfere in the affairs of man. He just creates, here you go. I'm going to stand back, hands off, and I'm going to watch. So if that's what you believe about God, why would you thank him for anything? Because he hasn't done anything for you. So Ben Franklin, I think maybe later on in his life ended up coming to Christianity, because it wouldn't make any sense for him to do that if he was a straight up deist.
And then Christians will sometimes overcorrect and want to say things like, one American politician, I think very well intentioned, but erroneously said recently that America was founded on the gospel of Jesus Christ. And I'm just like, well, not if that gospel is specific at all. I mean, to me, the gospel gets into Christ is the only way of salvation, and salvation's only by grace. And
right, but the founders weren't building a country to save people's souls from hell. So, yeah, I mean, I guess it wasn't built on the gospel insofar as, we weren't building a country to convert people's souls, because that wouldn't make any sense to write a constitution that's like, because you can't force conversion, right? I don't know what's in your heart, and I can't change your heart. So why would I write? Yeah, I guess, I don't know. That's kind of weird for him to say that. Like, of course, that doesn't mean that they weren't Christians, though. That just means that they're not taking them down Romans road in the Constitution. Like,
and these kind of things. And when you look at the landscape religiously in 1776, it's just far too diverse. You have people like Jefferson and Franklin who deny the divinity of Christ. They, deny the Trinity. Just the most basic theological issues. They're clearly not Christians. And so, for me, I tend to say, look, Christianity is influential in many, many, many ways on the founding, but let's not exaggerate to a point. I mean, my biggest concern is that we would exaggerate to the point where we're confusing the gospel, and somehow implying that, say, someone like Jefferson is a Christian when he denies basically all basic tenets of Christianity. And I think, if
so, then maybe it's more proper to say biblical, because even the non-Christians, even the Christian adjacent, I'll call them, even Quakers, for instance, there was plenty of Quakers here, all agreed that the best moral foundation for society was the Bible.
If we're defending civil religion more than we're defending the gospel, then you're tempted to say, well, look, they're all Christians because they have to be, because they're American founders. And that's just a mistake that I think Christians should be uncomfortable with.
Where would you say the nuance should be articulated then?
Yeah, well, it's the idea that Christianity is the Bible is the coin of the realm. In 1776, it frames the way people think and speak. Even someone like Jefferson. I did a book on Jefferson.
God's word, folks, does not return void. God's word does not return void, which is exactly why I am a fan of Texas putting the 10 Commandments in schools, because it's not about, for me as a Christian, it's not about like converting kids. It's about teaching them biblical morality. Some kids might lead some kids to, pick up a Bible and read it and get saved. And that would be great. That'd be fantastic. I want nothing more than that. But other kids might just be like, hey, some of this stuff just makes common sense. And boy, wouldn't society be a better place if we all lived by these principles? So
Jefferson, a few years ago, and trying to understand Jefferson's, complex religious views. So here you have somebody like Jefferson who denies all these basic Christian doctrines, and yet he knows the Bible better than, I'm afraid, a lot of church-going evangelicals know the Bible today.
Oh man, that was a stinger. And he's right. Unfortunately, he's right. Ohio Patriot, I'll address you really quick. Why do professors have the same demeanor and tone? Is it learned, required, born that way? I think it's conditioned in them as they go through their schooling. It's just, and they're all hanging out with each other, so they all just like adopt their mannerisms and way of speaking. That is funny though that you mentioned that, because they all do sound alike. But boy, was he right. Yeah. Most Christians who even go to church every single Sunday barely know their Bibles. And Professor Kidd here is saying that back then, even a man like Thomas Jefferson, who was not a traditional Christian, probably wasn't a Christian at all, just knew his Bible, knew the ins and outs of Old Testament, New Testament better than today's Christians know their Bible. And that is sad. That is very sad.
Jefferson evidently reads the Greek New Testament and the Septuagint. He does not know Hebrew, and John Adams will not let him forget it. John Adams tells him, well, a truly educated man knows Hebrew and can read the Hebrew Bible in Hebrew.
John Adams, a solid Christian man, by the way.
And Jefferson basically tells him to shove it. But anyway, since he can't read Hebrew, he reads the Septuagint for, evidently for just kind of personal devotions. I don't know how much he reads the Bible in English, but he has a phenomenal level of familiarity. I mean, that today we would probably associate with scholars of the Bible, but for Jefferson, it's just an avocation. I mean,
and that can only be a good thing, folks. That can only be a good thing, even if you don't know it as well as Thomas Jefferson may have known it. Just being familiar with the basics is a good thing. That's why I have no problem with Texas putting the 10 Commandments in school. I have no problem with other legislation being passed or being proposed in other states to teach the Bible in class. Like, I think it should be taught. God's word doesn't return void. Good things will be produced because of that. Just simply knowing it will produce good results.
And so what category do you put somebody like this in? And you asked about nuance. It's like, here's somebody who denies the divinity of Christ, who doesn't believe in the authority of Scripture, but he's able to read it in Greek and does so regularly, apparently for personal devotions. I mean, that I tell people, like, you don't know anybody like Jefferson today. Maybe a few liberal Bible scholars, but
well, folks, luckily for you, you don't have to learn Greek now, because we have the Strong's Concordance. You can type in any verse, it'll pull up the Greek for you and define every single word in the verse in the Greek. And however, you don't need to know Greek to know the Greek translation of the Bible, which is fantastic. Sometimes the Greek does give you a much better understanding of what's being said.
But I mean, you don't just run into people like Jefferson today. And so, I mean, that's one of the things, kind of history one.
And that's unfortunate, because I think a lot of atheists out there, there'd be a lot less atheist leftists if there was a lot more atheists familiar with the Bible. I don't know. What do you think?
One is you expect to be surprised by the unfamiliarity of the past. You don't go to the past looking for ammo in current political debates. And so if you do that and you say, look, there are things about 1776 that are just going to strike us as weird and unfamiliar, that's the right way to start, as opposed to looking to just put stuff in today's political boxes.
The scriptural lens is almost like the waters they swim in. Would that be a good way of putting it for someone as educated as Jefferson?
Yes. I mean, it's fish in water. I mean, that sometimes they're so familiar with the Bible, I think, that they'll quote it and not even really think about where this is coming from. But I mean, same thing with Benjamin Franklin. I mean, Franklin.
And everyone went to church, by the way. Even Thomas Jefferson, who was not a real Christian, went to the Episcopal Church in Williamsburg, Virginia. So I think that would be good for people as well. Even if you're not declaring Christ as king, I think going to church would benefit you. If Christ isn't your savior, I still think going to church would benefit you.
And calls himself a deist.
It benefited this country when we first started. I mean,
and does not believe in the divinity of Christ. Is certainly not a Christian in any kind of Orthodox sense. But he grows up.
I don't know, man. Like I mentioned earlier, I think there's indications that Ben Franklin later on in his life may have changed his mind. Again, the read the first chapter of his autobiography. He's giving thanks to God for all the good things that happened to him, in the life that he's had. It's weird to do that if you don't really believe in God. And he was surrounded by Christians. I don't know. I mean, it's a mystery, but I tend to lean towards Benjamin Franklin having a change from deism to Christianity later in his life, just by reading his words.
In a Puritan family in Boston, he's among the major founders. He's the oldest one, and so he had been born in 1706 in a Puritan family in Boston, and so he says that he had read the whole Bible by the time he was 5. I mean, that's pretty prodigious if he did. But with Franklin, I think I believe it because he just reads everything. And so, Franklin, the deist, he knows the text of the King James Bible better than any of the other major founders. Has a lot of it memorized.
Wow.
And so when he's giving speeches or writing things, I mean,
and that's another thing. Okay, so if he's that familiar with it, if he can memorize the most difficult translation of the Bible that is in English, which is the King James, folks. I don't know if you've ever picked up a King James Bible. It is insanely difficult to read. Once you get the hang of it, it's okay. But starting off, like, I do not recommend any new Christian pick up a King James Bible and start their Bible reading with that. It's a lot of the language. People don't talk that way. And they haven't talked that way in a really long time. So it's going to be really confusing to some people. But if he knew it that well, if Benjamin Franklin knew his Bible that well, the Bible doesn't teach deism. So it'd be really weird to immerse yourself in scripture like that and still come away with a theology of deism. That doesn't compute for me. That logically doesn't connect.
It's just full of references and allusions to the Bible. Now, just because it's a framing vocabulary does not necessarily mean that Franklin, believes everything in the Bible or that his behavior is being guided by the Bible. But
come on. I mean, yes. Okay. We're all sinners. Benjamin Franklin did some promiscuous stuff over in France. We know those stories. I think if you're not familiar, he was very fond of French prostitutes. But hey, we all make mistakes. That doesn't mean he didn't try to live morally according to the Bible. I try to live morally according to the Bible. I make mistakes almost daily. I mean, we all do. None of us can be perfect. So just because you've made a few moral blunders in your life, I wouldn't say that means that you're not trying to live according to biblical principles. I think that is a stretch. And he's connecting dots here that I think is a stretch.
It definitely does frame, what his understanding of morality. I mean, he definitely believes in Christian morality, and Jefferson says he does too. Although Jefferson isn't very good at living up to it, Franklin is.
None of us are. Okay, we try the best we can, but we all fall short. The Bible says we all fall short.
either when it comes to the ladies in France. But anyway, I mean, it's just everywhere. And so when you're making a political argument, especially about something as grave as needing to support the revolution against the British, you're going to turn to the Bible. I mean, it's just a very natural move for them to make. And in the West, I mean, we still do that sometimes, on occasions of like national tragedy, like 9/11 or something like that. I mean, it was very natural to have scripture readings. And, I remember President Obama on one of the anniversaries of 9/11, read one of the Psalms in its entirety, and it seems normal. The difference for President Obama is he has to tell us what the Psalm is, because we won't know it off the top of our head unless it's maybe Psalm 23. And so for the founders, a lot of them just know it. I mean, they know it. It's just right at their.
Not just the founders, the population at large knew their Bible in general, in total, more than Americans today know their Bible. Christians today know their Bible. I mean, it was taught. The first public schools, was it Virginia or Massachusetts? I think it was Massachusetts, was started to teach the Bible to kids, to teach them how to read and to teach them how to read from the Bible. I mean, you were brought up knowing your Bible. So it was just so much different, unfortunately, than it is today. Because if more Christians, self-proclaimed Christians, knew their Bibles, I think we'd be in a much better place as a country right now.
Fingertips, and so many people know the Bible really, really well that they can cite it. They don't even necessarily have to give chapter and verse, and people will know what they're talking about.
It makes me wonder whether that can be the cause of some of the confusion in statements of Christian founding in an era where biblical illiteracy is more common than it's not. To look through the timeline of the recent history of America and see the proliferation and the saturation of biblical quotes and references and paraphrases, and that almost coming across as, well, obviously these people were Christians. Obviously they're treating scripture like a modern day individual who would be that familiar with the text would be, like you say, outside of a number of specialists, liberal scholars, individuals who are, non-confessional, going to something like the Society of Biblical Literature. You wouldn't be talking like that.
Yeah. And I mean, with Jefferson, you see, a lot of people know about the Jefferson Bible, quote unquote, which is a compilation he did of the Gospels. It's not most of the Bible, but it's just the Gospels in a kind of chronological compilation with most of the miracles cut out. And people, sometimes evangelicals will look at that and they'll say, well, he thought the Bible was so important that he did his own edition of it. And I'm like, yeah, but like he's the Jesus seminar, he's like, making his own decisions about what we can believe that Jesus said and did, and what. So, I mean, this is anti-Christian. I mean, and so if you take that kind of surface level view of it, it's like, oh, this is great. He knows the Bible and he's interested in the Bible. Yeah, he knows the Bible really, really well, and there's a lot of it he does not believe in. And so for Christians,
Sure. Again, and I will say that is, I mean, his soul may have been damned, but I would say Thomas Jefferson made better decisions as a person, as a leader, because he knew his Bible so well. Again, I cannot stress this enough, right? Even if you don't believe in the divinity of Christ, if you believe in the principles laid out in the Bible, because they are divine, because God wrote the Bible, okay, it was God breathed, it's not going to return void. You will benefit from Christian principles, whether you believe the Christian God is the correct God or not. It's that simple. And that's, atheists don't seem to understand that. Like, the things that we want as Christians benefit you too. As much as you hate Christianity, what we offer benefits all of society, regardless of whether you declare Christ as king. Ohio Patriot question here in the chat. Franklin would have never agreed to a Bible-based country if he didn't believe the Bible was true. Would he? Would he? That's a good question. I don't know. Again, if he's like, Thomas Jefferson, he probably, thinks that the morality, the things in the Bible, are the best of all the literature available. The Bible has the best path of the best social contract, so to speak, for lack of a better term of putting it. So it could be, but Thomas Jefferson and Franklin, like I haven't read Thomas Jefferson's later in his life works, so to speak, but again, reading Benjamin Franklin's own words, I think they were on two different pillars. Two different pillars. I think Thomas Jefferson may have never actually come to true Christianity. But Ben Franklin, again, just based on what you read, him saying in, again, his autobiography, you kind of, it makes you think. It makes you wonder, like, did this man come to saving grace? Because he's talking like he may have. So
this is, I mean, you can be reassured about the level of biblical literacy at the time, but biblical literacy, doesn't always mean that you actually believe in what the Bible says.
Right. So I'm curious then, what did the founders mean by
But you believe something about what the Bible says, or you wouldn't be that literate in it. You wouldn't study it as much as you do. Thomas Jefferson had to take the time to write the Thomas Jefferson Bible. Like that takes a lot of your time to do, especially then. They didn't have AI to type in a prompt and get a whole book in 30 seconds, right? Like you wouldn't waste your time doing it if you didn't believe anything in it. That just wouldn't make any sense.
referencing things like nature's God or the creator or the supreme judge of the world, divine providence. These are words that we find in some of, these early founding documents. Is that then an indication of a belief system, or is it just those would have been the terminologies that would have been used in that day, given how people are understanding and referencing and being saturated within the Bible?
I have a theory on this question. Let's see how Professor answers it here.
Right. So the Declaration of Independence, which is what we are focusing on July 4th this year, has several really notable theological phrases in it. The Constitution says almost nothing about God, but that's not the anniversary we're celebrating this year. So nature and nature's God, like you said, all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Supreme judge of the world, divine providence. So, and Jefferson is the chief drafter. He's responsible for some of these. Others, the Congress or his framing committee put these references in. And especially, I think nature and nature's God sounds deistic. But I tend to think that Jefferson and his, committee and the people who are helping him with this are really referring to an idea that deists and Christians could agree on, which is
not just deists and Christians. So let me interject here. So you got to remember that these guys have to unite a bunch of different theologies under one cause. And so you can't be too specific in your language, because you got Quakers, you have Anglicans, you have a small amount of Catholics, you have Dutch Reformed, you have all these different denominations. You have Baptists are starting to come to the country. Baptists have actually started Providence, Rhode Island, Roger Williams, right? You have all these denominations. None of them, they can't even agree on how you baptize. Should you baptize an infant or not? Right? These, like, Christians infight with each other quite a bit. You can thank the Reformation for that if you want, but either way, you have to use language that appeals to all of them if you're trying to unite them. So that's creator, nature's God. I mean, the Declaration of Independence itself follows a model of forming a covenant with God. When you look at how the ancient Hebrews would do that in the Old Testament, when they would fall away and try to come back to God, it's the same pattern. It's like the way the Declaration of Independence is structured is just like that. Just like how the ancient Hebrews structured their covenants with, like, hey, we fell away, we were sacrificing humans, we want to be back in your good graces. It's crazy, the parallels there. And so I do think nature's God, creator, these are ways of uniting Christian denominations across the board, so that you're not segregating people or making people feel like this country isn't for them. And again, Christians infight constantly. So this was a perfect way. The way they worded it is exactly how you would word it if you were like, hey, let all the denominations come together here and unite for a cause of freedom and independence.
That there is a created order. And on that topic, someone like Jefferson, I think, has actually fairly conventional theological views. So if you get into the specifics of Christian doctrine is where Jefferson's views are problematic from a Christian perspective. But if the idea is that there is a created order and that our rights come from God, and our rights and our dignity are reflective of the fact that we were created by God, I think Jefferson's views are pretty much totally conventional. And so, nature and nature's God, I think, is just alluding to the fact that both by nature and reason and also by revelation, that you can understand these truths about human nature and rights and equality. And some readers might prefer the more rationalistic kind of approach. Some readers might prefer recourse to revelation, but your average reader is not going to make some, and so today we tend, evangelicals tend to focus more on revelation, but we also remember that the existence of the universe and the existence of existence suggests that there's also a creator, and that's the kind of thing that Jefferson is talking about nature. And nature's God. I tend to think, especially the bit about all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator.
Only the Bible teaches that all men are created equal, that we are all image bearers of God. Whether you believe in God or not, you bear his image. And if you come to saving faith in Christ, well, there is neither Jew nor Gentile nor slave nor free. We are all one under Christ Jesus. This is not taught in any other religion. There is no religion that teaches that human beings have value because they are made in the image of their creator.
Is a conscious choice by Jefferson and his committee to show the action of God in creation. And the reason why I think that is because the Virginia Declaration of Rights had been promulgated about a month before the Declaration of Independence. And in every statement of rights has something like this, a reference to creation or nature. And the Virginia Declaration of Rights says all men are by nature equal. Sort of sad trombone.
Yeah, that fell flat, didn't it?
It doesn't have that, the oomph of what Jefferson said. And so they knew the Virginia Declaration of Rights said that. And they decided, instead of saying by nature equal, they said all men are created equal and are endowed by their creator. So they made it more theological. They made it more theologically active. And so to me, that's the section of the Declaration to me that is the most theologically robust. And it's also
well, the whole thing is really theologically robust. Again, we pledge our lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. So they're asking God to grant them their freedom, and in return, they will pledge their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor. It's a covenant with God. It's crazy. Again, the parallels between the Declaration and Old Testament Israel is nuts. It's nuts.
So its robustness is why it's so memorable and why it is played such. I mean, it's the most important sentence in American history, and the reason is because it's so theologically specific.
So, given the Declaration's theological language, in your estimation, should it be understood as specifically Christian, broadly theistic, deliberately inclusive? What's the terminology that encapsulates that?
Well, I mean, in the language, it is not specifically Christian. And why that is, I mean, it could be some deference to Jews in America. I mean, there's not very many Jews, but
we just talked about it. I just mentioned it because, again, you have to unite these denominations under one umbrella that don't get along with each other, theologically speaking. How are you going to ignite people who are so used to fighting each other over trivial stuff? I'm sorry, Christians, but we fight each other over some of the most trivial, dumb things ever. Like the end times. Like, we will literally divide our churches over our views of the end times. We'll divide over whether babies can be baptized or should be baptized or not. We'll divide over just a lot of really dumb stuff. And back then, like, that turned to violence sometimes, right? So, how are you going to get all these denominations to be like, hey, we want to fight England for our freedom? You with us? Well, you got to be inclusive in a way. And I think that's what makes the Declaration so genius.
there are some involved in the Patriot movement. But given Jefferson, I mean, I think he's thinking in terms of people like himself who are, that are not interested in making.
Well, that too. We can't just unite the Christians. We have to unite the Christian adjacent Quakers, deists, people with bizarre kind of theological theories and thoughts and philosophies. And we want them all to fight freedom with us.
Really specific Christian claims, and that the point is the created order. The point is not Jesus as the unique Messiah or something like that. The point is the created order. And so,
lucky for them, the science wasn't around yet to be its own separate religion.
I think that Jefferson is wanting to say something that is, theologically general, but also robust. I mean, which is pretty tough to do, but boy, they did it. I mean, that's again why the Declaration is so powerful. And Jefferson, late in his life, said that what they were going for with the language of the Declaration is articulating, I love this phrase, he said, articulating the harmonizing sentiments of the day. Okay, so it's not sectarian. It's appealing to something that the broad range of people involved with the Patriot movement, from evangelicals to deists, and maybe even Jews, could say, yeah, that's right. That's where our rights come from. And it's showing the action of God in creation, but not using specifically Christian language. So, I mean, I would say it's powerfully theological, theistic, reflects a created order, but not specifically Christian.
I would disagree. The men around Thomas Jefferson were explicitly Christian. Again, I think we're looking at different denominations who are all Christian, and then you have the Christian adjacents. We have to appeal to all of them, but I mean, you can't be influenced by explicitly Christians. I mean, folks, of the 55 founders who signed the Constitution, only 3 of them didn't attend a denominational church of some sort. Some of them even were in leadership positions at their churches. We have members of Congress who were the first Congress who were pastors. I mean, it makes no sense to not say it's not explicitly Christian in that they weren't like, hey, this is Christian and Jesus is king. But we talked about that earlier in the show, why that is.
I think that's helpful. So if we're painting with a broad brush and we're talking about the founders, I know that can refer to, upwards of 150 individuals. But if we're talking about the 55 men who drafted the U.S. Constitution, or the 56 who signed the Declaration of Independence, do we have any idea how many would have claimed to be like a confessional Christian?
Yeah, I mean, I would say half to 2/3. I'm ballparking here, but the trouble is that you have people like Jefferson and Franklin, and who are the most notable examples of skeptics, and yet they both went to church a lot. I mean, and you know, in their cases, both the Anglican Church in their adulthood. So, I mean, they have confessional denominations.
Which is kind of funny because the Puritans fled the Church of England, the Anglican Church, to come and be something different. And then a lot of Anglicans came over here anyways. Question in the chat: who is Wes Huff and why do we care? Listen, Ohio Patriot, you don't know who Wesley Buff is? Come on. He's a biblical scholar in that he studies ancient manuscripts. So he has all kinds of degrees in that. So he studies ancient manuscripts. He's got a master's in theological studies, a PhD candidate. So he knows a lot about ancient Christian texts. He's famous because he debated an atheist, or I don't even know what you want to call him, but he went on somebody's show and made a complete fool of this guy. And ever since then, he's just like blown up. And now he's a Christian, pretty famous Christian content creator. Thanks for the question. Does he speak Hebrew? He knows the Hebrew very well. He knows Greek very well. If you watch any of his videos on, like how can we know the Bible is true? He breaks down ancient manuscripts in a way that's real easy to understand, which is why I like his content, because some of that stuff can be very complicated and dry.
National influences, and they know the Bible really well, and yet they're skeptics. Somebody like George Washington is clearly very, very respectful of Christianity and the Christian tradition and Christian morality. But he is strangely guarded about his own beliefs. And that he's one, I think his silence about his beliefs has led to a lot of speculation by evangelicals about, well, surely he was a Christian because, he thought so highly of Christianity. Okay, I mean, that seems right, but he would never talk about his own beliefs. And we also know that as an adult, he evidently never took communion. And so what's up with that? I mean, evidently he would either leave before they serve communion.
Today, that's not so weird because if you have so many Christians going to these mega churches, they never take communion. I'm sure there's plenty of saved people in those churches, but every Christian should be taking communion. But I still don't think George Washington, his beliefs were ambiguous. I mean, he's literally on a famous painting kneeling in prayer. His farewell letter to the army is explicitly Christian, in my opinion. He refers to Christianity as our religion, including himself in that. So George Washington, maybe he was guarded in what his beliefs were, because it's possible he was a Baptist. And for those of you who don't know, Baptists were persecuted in America for quite a while. In fact, they were persecuted so often, the letter from Thomas Jefferson, where he writes the famous separation of church and state line that all secularists love to quote, that essentially doesn't mean what they think it means. But anyway, that letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote was to Baptists, and Baptists were writing to Jefferson, the Danbury Baptists, hey, we want to make sure that we're not going to have a national church here because we're a little worried that we're going to get persecuted by the Presbyterians, et cetera, et cetera. Baptists were not treated well. In fact, Roger Williams, probably one of the most famous Baptists in early American history, before America became America, the Puritans threw him out of the colony because he didn't agree with the Puritans' theology, and he agreed with separation of church and state, the true definition. He believed in religious freedom, that all denominations should be allowed to practice their, Methodists, Puritans, whatever. We should all be able to live in the same place and worship God how we see fit. That's what the Baptists believed, and that wasn't liked. That wasn't liked. Like the Anglicans and the Dutch Reformed and the Puritans, like they hated that. They were like, no way, Jose. So maybe George Washington was a Baptist and he was afraid to speak on what he believed in because he didn't want to be persecuted and shunned himself. I don't know. That's just my theory. But he mentions Christianity a lot, and again refers to our religion a lot. You don't say that if you're not including yourself. So I don't know.
Or he would just not go on communion Sundays or whatever. Again, Anglican. I say all that to say that there are a good number of people kind of in the middle that it's a little difficult to know. Now, John Witherspoon, Presbyterian pastor and president of the College of New Jersey at Princeton, lockdown confessional, small Orthodox Presbyterian, no question. Roger Sherman of Connecticut, John Jay of New York, Elias Boudinot of New Jersey, Patrick Henry in Virginia. I mean, these are all very...
And on and on and on. See, most people, when they think of the founders, think of like the big five, right? Thomas Jefferson, Ben Franklin, George Washington, maybe throw Patrick Henry and John Hancock in there. They can count on one hand how many founders there are. Because they've only been taught about the big names, but there's like 150 like super influential guys that we would consider founding fathers that were part of this movement that helped build this movement. Sam Adams of beer fame, super hardcore Christian. There was a lot more Christians in this movement than there were non-Christians.
Clearly confessional, solid Orthodox Christians. So you can find them. It's just that they don't tend to be in the top, 5 or 6 founders that we spend the most time talking about now.
We've already mentioned that, the Bible is prolific. How frequently did American colonists use the Bible to explain or justify resistance to Britain?
Pretty much all the time.
Pretty much exclusively.
And I mean, it's a pattern that you see through, American and European wars for a long, long time. That, if you're going to have a revolution, a war, you're going to send your kids off to die in war. I mean, you can't just say we'd prefer not to pay taxes, right? I mean, you got to, say this is something that
you have to justify it biblically, because you got to convince almost 99.9% of your population are Christians, and the 0.1% are Christian adjacent. You have to convince them biblically that what you're doing is correct. You have to, like, there's no way around it. And up until this point, over in Europe, they're being taught that they need to submit to the rulers, that there is no justification ever for rebelling. This was a huge point of contention leading up to the revolution.
Taps into issues of, deep, profound issues about morality and rights and justice. And if you're going to do that in the culture of 1776, you just have to refer to the Bible. A friend of mine named James Byrd, he teaches at Vanderbilt, and he did a terrific book called Sacred Scripture, Sacred War, about the Bible and the Revolution. And Byrd actually, in the published sources from the time period, he actually counted up, what passages were being cited the most often. And he actually found that Romans 13 was, I think, the most often discussed passage, both by patriots and loyalists. So, Romans 13 on a plain reading, as you know, would seem to prohibit what the patriots did. And so I used to think, well, I guess the patriots just kind of avoided that passage.
No, sir. Fun fact, no, it actually wasn't Romans 13, at least when it came to the found. Maybe the colonists in general talked about it a lot. And the founders did talk about Romans 13 quite a bit. But the number one source that the founders referenced in terms of building government. So in terms of revolution, it may have been 13, but in terms of government, it was the Torah. Okay, so they're referencing the Jews out of Egypt. Deuteronomy referenced a ton when it comes to forming what type of government they want to form. So it wasn't just revolution; it was how do we build a government that we want to live under? And they look to the Bible for that mostly. I mean, you do have your John Locke's and your other philosophers, but most of the quotes come from the founders, come from the Torah when it comes to building government. But Romans 13 was actually funny. He mentioned that Jonathan Mayhew, very famous pastor, because in 1750. Again, hundreds of years, you have England teaching submit. You have Catholics teaching submit to the rulers. You can't rebel. Whatever they're doing doesn't matter. Romans 13 says submit. So that's what you have to do. And people are just like, okay. Well, Jonathan Mayhew completely turns that on its head. And he goes line by line through Romans 13 and just completely dismantles this notion that under no circumstance can people rebel against their rulers. And just changed his sermon was what lit the fuse to the revolution, because it was the most famous. I forget who said it was the most famous sermon of pre-revolution America, but it was the most famous sermon of pre-revolution America, and it got the colonists to buy in to Romans 13 not being what everyone had been taught for hundreds of years.
Because it's not convenient for them, but it's not true. I mean, they actually had a really sophisticated tradition of the conditions under which Christians could resist the government, even to the point of violence. And it gets into, Christian just war theory, and is it a just cause, and do you enlist the lesser magistrates, as they would call it, about leading the revolution?
Just war theory invented by early church fathers, where there's a set of criteria that if you meet all the criteria, then your war is just and you can go to war. If you're even missing one of the criteria, and off the top of my head, I can't remember what all the criteria are. A couple of them are, can you minimize damage to civilians? Can this be won? I've done a video on this before, but it's been so long I can't remember all the criteria. But you can't miss one of the criteria. You have to meet all the criteria to go to war, and that was, can't remember the church father who invented it. It wasn't Athanasius, but it goes way back, like early church fathers.
I mean, they certainly didn't think you could just have a bunch of yahoos, running around trying to, overthrow the government or something. That they wouldn't put up with that. But they had a very sophisticated biblical argument for when the kind of revolution they're engaged in. Now, whether it's a convincing argument, I think is something the listeners will have to decide for themselves. But
well, let me convince you. So Romans 13 lays out. In fact, let me pull it up right here, and I'll name you some key lines in here in Romans 13. So Romans 13 specifically lays out the function of government. Like this is what a government is to do. If it doesn't do that, then it's not God ordained. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. So if your rulers are holding terror for those who do right and not holding terror for those who do wrong, it's not of God. Do you want to be free from fear for the one in authority? Then do what is right and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. So if the government is acting contrary to this, if it's punishing the good and rewarding the wicked, this is not a minister of God anymore. And that's made pretty clear in the text. Pretty clear.
But it did make me feel better that they didn't just kind of blow off, Romans 13 and 1 Peter 3 about honor the king and things like that. They knew that those verses were problems for them, and so they took them on. I also often point out the fact that when you look at the most important pamphlet of the Revolution is Thomas Paine's Common Sense, and it has an extended exegesis. It's not a very good exegesis, but
There is, look, I'm telling you, chat. I'm telling you. Let me, if I can pull it up, I'll drop the link in the chat. But you want to read this sermon? If Thomas Paine is a bad exegesis of Romans 13, Jonathan Mayhew's exegesis of Romans 13, it's one of the best I've ever read, and it was written in 1750. It still holds today. Theologically speaking, it is airtight. It is an airtight exegesis of Romans 13. And again, like I said, his sermon changed the mindset of everybody in the colonies. Now we know that we were lied to about Romans 13 and submission to authorities and when we're supposed to submit and how for hundreds of years. Completely changed the game. Jonathan Mayhew changed the game.
It does have an extended exegesis of 1 Samuel 8, where Israel asks for a king, and God says, you don't want a king. A king will abuse you.
1 Samuel 8, the only chapter of the Bible that libertarian Christians know how to read.
And a king's going to raise taxes on you, and you're going to really regret it. And Israel says, no, we have to be like everybody else. Please give us a king. And God tells Samuel, they've rejected me as their king. And so Paine says, this is where God, told his people that monarchy is evil. And so it's kind of, the original sin politically is asking for a king. And so this is why we know that we should reject the authority of the king. Now, I mean, as you know, the Old Testament also has lots of nice things to say about kings. So, I mean, even John Adams thought this argument was.
Yeah, man. But here's the thing. It does have some nice things to say about kings, but those were very specific, truly God-ordained kings, right? David was anointed by a prophet Samuel. Those prophets don't exist after from the period of time between the Old and New Testaments, that gray area, that dead period where no one hears from God for what, 2,000 years, 400 years? Forgive me for not knowing the exact number. I believe it's 400 years. Somebody in the chat correct me what the period is between the Old and New Testament. But whatever that is, that's the end of Old Testament prophets. So yes, if an Old Testament prophet or anoints a king, of course there's going to be good things said about him because that's God anointed. I wouldn't paint that as broad strokes that king monarchies are fine. I wouldn't connect those dots.
Just stupid. But the point is that this is the most influential pamphlet of the Revolution, and one of the reasons it's so effective is because it engages in, extended exegesis of 1 Samuel 8, other biblical references, because that's what people need in order to support the cause of revolution. So I could give other examples, but that's the most influential pamphlet of the Revolution, and it has a lot in it, not just quotes, but even exegesis.
Thank you, Ohio Patriot. 400 years. Yes. Okay. I said 2000. That was way off. I don't know where I got that. But anyways, yeah, 400 years. That's it. No more Old Testament prophets.
The Bible.
No, I think that's helpful. I want to back up a little bit and talk about the Great Awakening and its kind of relation to the Revolution. So, with the first Great Awakening, this is in the 1730s into 1740s. How did itinerant ministers and intercolonial religious networks contribute to what becomes a shared American identity?
Yeah, this is a debated issue in the literature on the Great Awakening, is that some historians, and not just Christian historians, have said that the Great Awakening is a kind of test run on the American Revolution, and that part of the reason for that is because it fosters this kind of intense spiritual inter-American colonial unity.
Where is our Great Awakening today? Boy, do we need a spiritual awakening to breed unity from coast to coast. We need it bad.
And it's just 30 years before the Revolution. And I think that there's probably something to that. I mean, if at a minimum, the Great Awakening is the biggest religious and social upheaval in American colonial history prior to the Revolution. I mean, it affects, virtually all of the white population of the colonies. And I mean, it is a huge cultural phenomenon. And so whatever America is on the eve of the Revolution is heavily conditioned by the Great Awakening. Where I would pump the brakes a little on that argument is it's easy to forget that George Whitefield, who is the most influential revivalist of the First Great Awakening, is British. He's English, and he spends the majority of his life in England. And he is as powerful of a revivalist in England, Wales, and Scotland as he is in the American colonies. So, I mean, you could make an argument that maybe the Great Awakening was an even bigger deal in America than it was in Britain. Maybe that's true. But, Whitefield is British, and he dies in 1770. So we don't know for sure what he would have thought about the Revolution. If I had to guess, I would say he probably wouldn't have supported the Revolution itself.
Yeah, but you're just guessing. And your guess is based on the fact that he was an evangelist in Britain as well as America. And that doesn't make any sense, really, because maybe he would have agreed with all 25 grievances laid out in the Declaration of Independence against the king. Maybe he would have had those same grievances. You don't know. It's kind of wild to speculate that he would have been against it, knowing what we knew occurred 5 years after his death, 6 years after his death. Like, by the time we get to that point, so what that he was an evangelist in Great Britain? And
I think he definitely would have supported the resistance, but he would have liked for it to remain just political. And he, I think, had a lot riding on the continuation of the British Empire in America. Whitefield is himself.
Well, the founder, we didn't just jump to war. It took a long time. Like, we tried to keep it political. The founders tried to solve things through politics, and it didn't work. It's not like they were mad with power and just like war hawks. They were not war hawks. So this it was a slow buildup that just boiled over.
An Anglican minister, and has, obviously transatlantic connections that he didn't want to see broken. But he is friends with Franklin. Franklin is his lead publisher in America, and they're very close. And so, for instance, when Franklin testifies in Parliament against the Stamp Act in 1766, which is kind of the beginning of the resistance movement that ultimately leads to the Revolution, Whitefield is there supporting Franklin. So, I mean, I think Whitefield definitely would have been supportive of the resistance movement, but it's kind of one of those counterfactuals because he dies, and so we don't know. But people definitely claimed Whitefield's memory in the Revolution. I mean, there's a famous episode in during the war that there's Continental Army soldiers going up to Canada, by the way, to fight in Quebec, and they stop in Newburyport, Massachusetts, on the way up to Canada, and Newburyport is where Whitefield is buried. And allegedly, the officers go down into the crypt and take pieces of his clothing off of his clerical collar and wristbands. This is what they say, off of his dead body, and cut it up and distribute the relics among the troops. It just
sounds like something Catholic.
What are we? Are we Catholics here? What's going on? I don't understand. But and they never explained publicly why they did that. But to me, it seems pretty clear. They're saying what the Revolution is about is what Whitefield was about. Like he's the patron saint of the Revolution. So whether that makes any sense or not, I don't know. But I mean, it's a pretty visceral connection of the Revolution to Whitefield. And again, Whitefield is the most important evangelist of the Great Awakening.
That was a really long-winded way to say I don't know. He just took like 5 minutes to say I don't know.
Yeah. Do you think the Great Awakening democratizes American religion before the Revolution democratizes American politics?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I mean, one of the things that people forget about the Great Awakening is, even Christians could look at the Great Awakening and they're like, oh, this is just some kind of church affair, and it's kind of quaint, and isn't this nice that you have these revival? Well, but it has deep troubling political implications for colonial authorities. I mean, because they're having to pass all kinds of laws, and the colonial legislatures banning these radical itinerants from just barging into. I mean, they show up at people's churches and say, "Can I preach from the pulpit?" And then they say, "Pastor Bob here is going to hell," right? And I mean, you think, okay, that's really rude, and but Pastor Bob it is an agent of the state because they have established churches, right? I mean, so no one has ever talked about the pastors in this kind of, outlandish, incendiary, one might say, revolutionary way. And I think this is where, this kind of practice run type of model, it's
Again, folks, this, like how we discussed earlier, all the how Christians infight with each other and denominations, and the reason the wording in the Declaration is the way it is, so we can bridge the gap and unite people under a cause that have so many different theological ideas, because like he just described, right? So you have pastors during the Enlightenment going to churches and telling hey, can I speak at your pulpit? And then telling the pastors, oh, sure, yeah, you can speak on my pulpit. And then telling that pastor he's going to hell. Because you have things like that, and that's a reason why the real separation of church and state, a Baptist idea, is a good thing, right? You don't want a state-controlled church, because then you can tell other denominations of Christianity, you can just persecute them, right? I don't want, if I live, let's just, for example, say I live in Ohio, and Ohio, the state church is the Presbyterian church, and I'm a Baptist, but my tax dollars go to support the Presbyterian church. It's nonsense. And then the Presbyterian church says that actually Sundays are only for Presbyterians. If you want to worship as a Baptist, you got to go to church on Friday, or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you get into that's the real separation of church and state. Just not that Christians can't be in politics or shouldn't be in politics, because they absolutely should, and they've influenced our founding to the highest degree. But controlling how other denominations of Christianity worship, and having your tax money go to a specific church when you're not part of that church doesn't make any sense. And these are the reasons why, again, you don't see the word Jesus Christ in the Declaration of Independence, and you see words like creator and things like that. Again, we're trying to unify people. A lot of nuance in the revolution. I think a lot of people have been taught that the revolution is black and white. Open your school books. We're going to learn these bullet points, and that's the revolution. And that's really not the case. There's so much to it. It's one of the greatest historical time periods in world history, quite frankly.
The people rising up against the established authorities. I mean, there's one moment in Connecticut in 1742 where they have to call out the militia on these evangelical rioters. I mean, so this, the Great Awakening is scary. It's menacing. It's a popular uprising against the established authorities. And so, I don't want to draw on too direct of a line from point A to point B, but it is, this really powerful populist uprising against, state and church power. So, if that is an outbreak of kind of democratic sentiment in the 1740s, and it has to condition, whatever America is when the revolution's getting ready to happen.
So I'm curious. You're Baptist, I'm Baptist, so there's
hey, fellow Baptists,
a self-serving aspect to me, sure, asking questions related to Baptists. But how did persecution of Baptists in places like Virginia influence the development of American religious liberty?
Yeah.
Hello. Wasn't I talking about this earlier, folks? Give me a medal or something. Give me a cookie.
So one of the things that I think a lot of evangelicals are surprised by about the revolution and the founding tradition is that evangelicals, especially Baptists, are the staunchest advocates of the separation of church and state, which, in the past 50 years in America has come into bad odor among evangelicals because evangelicals hear it as anti-Christian.
Because today it's used anti-Christian. That's why we think that, because it's been trained in our public education system to teach kids that grow up to be adults that think that. That's why we think that way. And that's why when we hear it, we think anti-Christian. It's been taught as something anti-Christian when it's absolutely not. It has nothing to do with keeping Christians out of politics or religious principles out of politics or biblical principles out of politics. It has nothing to do with any of that.
But the Baptists in particular, in places like Virginia and Massachusetts, on the eve of the revolution, are terribly persecuted for illegal preaching, for refusing to get a state license to be a preacher, having meetings that are considered to be illegal meetings. And so Baptist preachers are being beat up, horsewhipped, jailed, fined for tax evasion, everything you could imagine, short of outright murder. That's the way they're being treated. I mean, we talk about persecution today. The Baptists in the 1760s and 70s are being persecuted by the colonial American governments. And so when they're calling for religious liberty and separation of church and state, it is with the memory of just having been persecuted by a lot of the same people who are now running the patriot movement. And so they said, what, are we supposed to trust you now? Just yesterday you were horsewhipping our pastor. And so there's tension there for a lot of evangelicals about, we see the argument for liberty and against the tax programs and against parliamentary sovereignty. We get those arguments, but to us, the most precious liberty of all is religious liberty. And too often the American state governments have denied
Christian religious liberty, not Islamic or Hindu or even Jewish. Even though we say Judeo-Christian values, we say that because of we treasure the Old Testament, and we treasure the fact that Jesus was a Jew. But rabbinic Judaism, what's the oh gosh, not Torah followers, but the other book that they follow. And it's got a lot of weird stuff in it with traditions and all that stuff. I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, but none of that stuff. We're talking about freedom for the Christian denominations that are here, specifically
religious liberty to evangelicals. And so Baptists say, we don't want any more official state churches. They persecute people like us. All we want is
Talmudic. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Talmudic Judaism. None of that. That's not what we mean.
For the government to leave us alone and let us preach the gospel in freedom. Stop making us pay taxes to support churches that we do not attend, and let us compete. Give us a free market of religion, and we'll take care of the rest. And so that's the impulse of.
I heard a really interesting theory that's what the pursuit of happiness means. That if you look at Blackstone. One of the prefaces to one of his books, Blackstone was a philosopher that the founders got some of their ideas from. He describes the pursuit of happiness as pursuing God as your conscience dictates. So could that mean when they wrote Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness? Could that be what they meant by that? Not your own happiness, but simply pursuing God as your conscience dictates. Makes sense. I don't know if it's true, but it makes a lot of sense.
Of evangelicals, especially Baptists, for religious liberty. But it does breed a kind of tension between Baptists in particular and a lot of the patriot leaders. So, for instance, Isaac Backus, the great Baptist leader in revolutionary Massachusetts, is pleading with Massachusetts leaders like Samuel Adams and John Adams to drop the official state church in Massachusetts. And the Adamses are totally unsympathetic. They're like, you all are just a bunch of troublemakers. You're just always complaining, you Baptists. We're not dropping the state church. And so people like Backus, I mean, he ends up supporting the Patriot movement, but he's like, what? Why should we trust you people? You're denying religious liberty to Baptists. So why should we trust you people? So there was a surprising number of Baptists who did not support the revolution because of these reasons. They say
I as a Baptist would have supported the revolution still, because at the end of the day, the good that would come out of that outweighs whatever is happening to me now. Plus, I mean, you see a lot of Christians, especially the hardcore Christian nationalists on social media, calling for state churches again, because the Overton window, the way the country has shifted so dramatically. In their minds, the only way to restore morality to this country and bring us back to the ideas of the founding and get this country back on the right track is to completely swing as far as we can in the other direction and put state churches in. Is that the solution? Are we so far gone that's what we have to do? I don't think you'll ever see it, but is it a solution? Would it work as a solution? That can be debated.
people persecute us. We're not interested in supporting your movement.
It's a helpful clarification. I see that term, separation of church and state, used and abused. And because it comes from, correct me if I'm wrong here, 1802, right? The letter that Thomas Jefferson writes to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut. But it goes before that, does it not? The concept exists prior to him. He doesn't, pull it from whole cloth.
Yeah.
1600s, Roger Williams, again, thrown out of the Puritan colony for being a Baptist, right? Founds Providence, Rhode Island, and crafts the first state charter or city charter or whatever it was that has separation of church and state in it. That is the first document that we have on American soil with separation of church and state. Providence, Rhode Island, Roger Williams.
And it's actually a pro kind of religious liberty statement rather than disassociating church from the life of the American public. Do I have that correct?
Yeah. So, I mean, and the phrase is a wall of separation between church and state and the notion of separation, church and state, as you said, is, older than 1802, but Jefferson, and it's such a fascinating case because as you said, it is directed to a group of Baptists. That's really important to understand. So in Connecticut in 1802, they still have an official state church. The First Amendment to the Constitution only restricts Congress from creating an establishment of religion. The states are free to do what they want.
Should the states still be allowed to do that? Do what they want, establish state churches, no national church, right? Congress can't establish a national church. Should the states be allowed to keep their state churches?
And so the Baptists, they love Jefferson because Jefferson's the champion of religious liberty. And Jefferson was instrumental in getting Virginia to drop its official state church. And so the Connecticut Baptists say to Jefferson, who's now president, we love you, President Jefferson. Can you do anything to help us get rid of the Connecticut state church? And Jefferson says, well, look, I'm only the president of the United States. I can't tell Connecticut what to do about its state church, which I love Jefferson for that. But he says, aren't we glad that the First Amendment at least restricts the national government from having a state church? Instead, it promotes religious liberty, thus erecting a wall of separation between church and state. And hopefully at some point, Connecticut will also decide that the principle of religious liberty requires them to drop their state church, which they did in the 18 teens. But do these Baptists want the government to be anti-Christian? Of course not. That would be ludicrous. Jefferson doesn't want them to be the government to be anti-Christian either, even though Jefferson is a skeptic, and by that point
So here's a fun fact for you. Here's a fun fact for you, that is in relation to that Jefferson letter, Wall of Separation, right? So you just heard him explain the reason why that letter was written. It was written to Baptists who were afraid of the Connecticut church. And Jefferson was simply saying, aren't you glad that there will be no federal church, basically? But the reason that this letter is so famous goes back to Everson versus Board of Education, which cited this letter, which stated the famous wall of separation of church and state metaphor. It was used in this court case to get rid of, I do believe, Bible teaching out of public schools. And later on was used in the 1960s in Engel versus Vitale to ban prayer in public schools. Abington School District versus Shemp, 1963, banned mandatory Bible reading, citing Jefferson's letter. And what's crazy about this is that the judges who are using this letter are using it like Thomas Jefferson didn't. This isn't a executive order that Thomas Jefferson had. There's no law in the country anywhere that would be used as a precedent to separate church and state in the way that those judges did to get prayer and Bible reading out of public schools. There's none of that. They cited a letter. Like that makes no logical sense in a court of law, that you're not citing a law somewhere else in the country to fall back on. You're citing a letter like that. It'd be if Thomas Jefferson created an executive order that had separation of church and state. And sure, I guess we could use that as precedent to separate church and state in other ridiculous ways. But they cited a letter where he's just mentioning it to the Danbury Baptists, assuring them that there's not going to be a national church. It's utterly ridiculous. It's absurd. It's absolutely absurd how that wording, that letter from Thomas Jefferson has been abused by judges, which makes sense when you see how judges are abusing their authority today. We are on a domino effect of judges abusing power, and they've been doing it for a while now.
His life, he's kind of becoming a Unitarian, but he doesn't want the government to be anti-Christian. What they're talking about is official state denominations, and so they're against that, and I'm against that.
Sorry, I had to fact check myself. So Everson versus Board of Education, the one that started this domino effect in 1947, was a case involving parents being reimbursed for bus transportation to religious schools as well as public ones. And the court ruled that you cannot be reimbursed for transportation to a religious school. So that's where it started. And then we get to the 60s where the prayer is banned and then the Bible readings are banned. Sorry, I had to fact check that.
I mean, imagine, a government-run denomination. It's just gross. I mean, look at what the Church of England has become. And particularly in England, it's just rotten. And so
it's rotten now. It's becoming Muslim. The Church of England is becoming a mosque.
Baptist point of view, we say, we want the government to stay out of the business of running denominations, and have a free market of religion, and as best you possibly can, not play favorites denominationally. But if the idea is, promoting Christian morality, yeah, absolutely. I mean, because all law has to be based on some kind of morality.
Bingo.
So there's a difference there between, promoting morality in law, which is, just there's no other option than to promote a form of morality in law. And
that is what the atheists don't understand. You will be governed by someone's morality. Like, you can't avoid that. So it's absurd and silly to say that your Christian morality can't govern people. It makes no sense.
And if I could choose, I would choose for it to be Christian morality, and then having an official national or state denomination. And it's the second part that in the Baptist tradition you don't want.
So let me get us into some hot water then, and throw out the term Christian nationalism, because that's a topic that, I mean, I see all over the place on social media, on YouTube. It's in the news every once in a while. What do we make of that term in light of something like, I mean, I'm in Canada, but there's religious foundings, colonial heritage, similar, although different from you guys south of the border. But with a term that's being frequently used to label this thing or that thing, Christian nationalism, what do you think is a proper use of that term, and how do you see that going awry at the moment?
Yeah, I don't think it's a very useful term either on the left or the right. I mean, for the secular left, Christian nationalist just means a Christian who thinks their faith has political implications,
right?
And that's useless. I mean, is it Christian nationalism when liberal Christians are they don't say that because they agree with liberal Christians' politics. So it's just silly. I mean, that's extremely unhelpful. I mean, I think that I'm sympathetic, obviously, politically, to if the idea is I'm a Christian and I support pro-life laws. If that makes me a Christian nationalist, okay, that's fine. I think that's a silly way to describe it. But
pretty low bar.
But yeah,
sure, yeah, I'm with you. If that makes me a Christian nationalist, then I guess I'm a Christian nationalist. Ohio Patriot, bottom line, this country was founded by and for Christians, needs to stay that way. Agreed.
But what does concern me on the right is a kind of hankering for state religion.
Like I had just mentioned, yes, there is a huge hankering to swing the pendulum as far back into the other direction as it has swung in the direction we currently are in.
And often it's not entirely clear what people are saying that they want, but maybe religious test oaths for office holders, which is specifically banned in the U.S. Constitution, saying that we can only have Christian rulers or Christian politicians.
Now, listen, I am for religious tests for office insofar as they don't discriminate denominationally. I would be fine if you had to affirm the Trinitarian God of Scripture, but not necessarily infant baptism or whatever. I think I'd be okay with that.
Maybe it's restricting immigration from people from non-Christian majority countries.
I would be okay with that as well. And in fact, I think that's needed right now. Because I mean, you can't. Well, there's no such thing as neutrality, right? So pluralistic utopias don't exist. You can't take different cultures with different moralities and different traditions and throw them together and expect them to just magically come up with a society in which everybody is treated exactly the same, because there's no such thing as neutrality. So I think at least in the immediate term for an indefinite period of time, yeah, we probably should restrict immigration, legal immigration. Illegal immigration's out the window, like no illegal immigration whatsoever, but we should restrict legal immigration and take it away from countries that are probably Muslim, at least. Hindu, maybe that too. Pagan. I don't know of too many pagan nations out there, but China, I guess you could count as a pagan nation. But I think, yeah, those countries specifically, we should restrict and cancel all legal immigration from those countries for the time being.
Maybe it's having an official state church or something like that. And so many of these things to me it's so theoretical and like politically unlikely, let's put it that way, to happen. But I think some of this is just frustration with the excesses of the radical left, that the transgender stuff, and I mean, it's just gotten so unbelievably extreme. And
Exactly. So you can see why other Christians are being that extreme, because they see it as their only way to fight this extreme.
And at times that the national and state and city governments have gotten behind this kind of radical left agenda. And so there's a frustration on the Christian right and saying, we have to fight fire with fire. And I mean, I'm certainly for that if the idea is that we need to push back hard, along with friendly fellow travelers, to say, no, a man cannot be a woman, and whatever political implications that has. However, if the idea is churches collaborating with the state to promote and enforce Christian doctrine or norms or something like that,
norms I'm okay with. I'm okay with the collaboration insofar as there's no state control of the church whatsoever. Doctrine is impossible to enforce. Like, you can't enforce, if I don't believe in infant baptism, again, I know I keep going to that because it's one of the most popular theological debates among Christians. For you to like come to my house and tell me I have to baptize my infant, I think would be ridiculous and absurd. So I'm with him in this part, that you can't enforce Christian doctrine. I can't like come to your house and tell you accept Christ as your Lord and Savior. I can't regulate your heart in that way. I can't regulate your salvation. That's also stupid. So I'm with him in that part.
I think we should be very cautious about that, because
agreed.
It's never worked out well, especially for groups like the Baptists. And as soon as the government is able to call balls and strikes and pick favorites in terms of religious groups, you can bet it will be turned against Orthodox believing Christians sooner or later.
I mean, you got to think the Muslims were able to take Constantinople because of theological divides among Christians. Think about that. Constantinople fell because of Christian theological divides. One of the first crusades, Christians attacked fellow Christians on their way to go free the Holy Land because of theological divides. Like, that's why you can't, that's why separation of church and state in the way it really means is important, because we will do dumb things to each other like that.
It always happens that way. It will. I mean, if you start having tests of faith for office holders, we will start saying that if it's a Republican who says that they're a Christian, then we say that's a Christian, and theologically that is just super problematic. I mean,
well, yes and no, right? People can always lie. I mean, you can't. I mean, how are you going to tell? I mean, you really couldn't be able to tell. I'm as long as it's not denomination specific. Again, if you affirm the most denominations agree that our God is Trinitarian. So if you affirm the Trinitarian God of the Bible, I'm okay with that, because I think that would inevitably keep quite a few other religions out, who would be hesitant to even lie about that. So I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Because being sympathetic to Christian morality does not make you a Christian. I'm very happy for people to support Christian morality. It does not make you a Christian.
And again, that's like we mentioned at the beginning of the show, that is one of the main problems with America, is that the non-Christians in the founding era agreed with Christian morality and agreed with a lot of the things in the Bible, even if they didn't believe in the God of the Bible. We don't have that today. Atheists hate the Bible. If they even pick one up, they'll go on YouTube and find a content creator to help them rip it to shreds before they even read it and critically think about it for themselves. It's just, that's, two different worlds where when we were a population that has a deep respect for the Bible, even as a non-Christian, versus a population that hates the Bible. It's wild.
So those are areas where you really do want to separate church and state and let the church be in charge of preaching the gospel, protecting, biblical theology,
teaching theology of politics as well,
saying who's in and who's out and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that's the church's job. It is not the state's job. And we can assume that the state will mess it up if we ask the state to do it. So, that's the part that I think we have to be really cautious about, the so-called Christian nationalism.
Yeah. Well, thank you for solving the issue of Christian nationalism for us on YouTube today. We can,
you bet.
Feel free to not see it on social media anymore going forward.
Yeah, right. Good luck with that. That is the end of the interview, folks. Thank you for sticking around. Hit that thumbs up button for your boy. Subscribe to my channel if you are not already. If you have any last minute questions about church and state, America's founding, any of that stuff, I will try to answer that for you here in the next few minutes. But I think to wrap things up, Dr. Kidd there, Wesley Huff's guest, Thomas Kidd, professor from an Ivy League school, actually did a pretty good job. I was shocked. I was really shocked that he was not woke in any capacity throughout that interview, that he stayed pretty factual. I think I was able to fill in some gaps that he left out, but I think for the most part, he nailed most of it. I think he nailed most of it. So big shout out to him and Wesley Huff for hosting him on that show. And thank you for joining me on my first reaction live stream, reacting to videos live. I never do this. I always do pre-recorded stuff. So felt good to do something live and kind of interact with the chat a little bit. So thank you for joining me. I am live again Thursday night, folks, 9:45 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, where we will break down the latest news. It's a political commentary show with my brother Alex Medeiros. So hope to see you there. Until next time, God bless. Christ and liberty over everything. Until next time, God bless. Boy, did I mess that up. I did, didn't I? All right, take care. Love you guys.